ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाखया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिन् इति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। So this chapter is called entanglement in fruitive activities. How the living entity actually is bound in this material world is a very important factor to understand if we at all want that the living entity should be liberated. We should also understand what binds them. So what binds them is this desire for fruitive activities. These fruitive activities are a network of entanglement. The actions and reactions are so that perpetually the living entity can remain in this material entanglement without getting freed. That is why it is described anadi karma phale, very difficult to find out when the living entities have become entangled, because it's a huge network. From time immemorial, the living entities are bound in this material existence because of this desire to enjoy the fruits of their actions. So that is why this is called as entanglement in fruitive activities. In the earlier verse, Lord Kapila described there are two kinds of married life, grahastha and grahamedhi. So here in this chapter, this entanglement in fruitive activity, this happens to a person who is a grahamedhi, whose only desire is to enjoy the actions, the reactions of his activities. So, the center of his life is to derive material sense pleasure. How does he do? He is definitely religious. This is not describing about sinful man. That was described earlier already. How a person who is acting sinfully, how he suffers after coming out of the womb of the mother. The varieties of different kinds of sinful activity he performs. In that life also he suffers, and after the life he is taken to the abode of Yamraj, and we saw that varieties of punishment the living entity receives. Here the Grahamedhi, he does not want to act sinfully. He wants to avoid sins. and he wants to act piously. Here, the Grahamedhi, he does not want to act sinfully. He wants to avoid sins and he wants to act piously. He wants to avoid sins. And he wants to act piously. Here, the Grahamedhi, he does not want to act sinfully. He wants to avoid sins and he wants to act piously. So, how the living entity becomes bound by these varieties of fruitive activities which he performs is described in this chapter. So, what happens is, it is not that once he performs and then he comes to his senses. It is very difficult to come to one's senses. They are so binding. This material world is called Punaha Punaha Charvita Charvanana. Right? We saw that in the last verse. And that is exactly what Lord Kapila also described. The person who lives in the center of household life derives material benefits by performing religious rituals. So he performs different kinds of religious rituals. That is called as Karma Kanda portions of the Vedic literatures. And thereby he fulfills his desire for economic development and sense gratification. Artha and Kama. And actually that is how Dharma, Artha, Kama is generally described. People perform these varieties of rituals as a part of Dharma. For what? For economic development, and economic development is required for sense enjoyment. Now, what is the difference between the direct process called as Bhagavata Dharma and this indirect process which is given in the Vedic literatures? So we understand that these Vedic literatures are meant for gradual elevation of the living entity from the different modes of material nature. Some living entities are in Tamoguna, some are in Sattva-guna, some are in Rajoguna. So depending upon the different modes in which the living entities are there, different methods are prescribed for gradual elevation. So I was reading in Bhagavad Gita, this Krishna describes this very nicely right in the beginning of the chapter, second chapter, I think he describes this. So Krishna gives an example that how in the Vedic times there used to be different wells. If you want to take bath, there is a different well. If you want to wash clothes, there is a different well. Because for drinking you require more pure water. You require, it should not be very hard. Sometimes we find the water hardness is more. Drink that, it will cause a lot of problem. So for drinking, separate water, separate well will be there. Then for washing the cattle, another well can be there. For washing your cloth, another well can be there. For other household utilities, another well can be there. But then, if there is a great reservoir of water, Prabhupada says, just like a flowing river, it can serve all the purposes of all these varieties of different wells. You see, this is very important. All the purposes which are served by these different wells can be at once served by one great reservoir of water. So Vedic literatures are giving both the processes. If somebody is intelligent enough, he can directly take the direct process, or if somebody's intelligence is bewildered, his intelligence is stolen away by Maya, Hritagyana, And how the intelligence becomes stolen away? Kames, by sense enjoyment. When one becomes blind, mad after sense enjoyment, his intelligence goes away. There is no viveka. He is not able to discriminate what should he do, what he should not do. That we find. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes how one falls down to abominable species of life. Dhyayate vishayan pumsaha sangasteshu pujayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamaha krodho vijayate krodhat bhavati sammohaha sammohat smriti vibhramaha. Right? And then finally buddhi nashat pranashyati. When intelligence is bewildered, it is lost, then the living entity falls down. So, this is very clear in the Vedic literature. So, kames teste hritagyana, when his intelligence is bewildered, he does not know. He does not understand that actually what I am going to derive from these varieties of Devatas, I can immediately derive by worshipping the Supreme Lord. And I can get much more benefit. This he does not understand. Isn't it foolishness? Imagine, Devata worship can give you certain things, not anything more than that. Worshipping the Supreme Lord can give you that something which you are desiring and can give you even more than that. That is why Bhagavatam is saying, Akamo sarva kamova. It does not matter. You have no desire, akama, akamo, or you have all desires, sarva kamova. Or even if you have moksha kama, you have desire to become liberated. Yajeta purusham param. Still, better to induce people to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we find that example, and very vivid examples are given in Bhagavatam. Dhruva Maharaj, he approached the Supreme Lord with a desire. He had a desire, very great desire, not a small desire. We all approach the Supreme Lord with some petty desires. His desire was very difficult. Even no demigod could satisfy that kind of desire. He wanted a position greater than even Brahma. That was his desire. You see? Anyone in his lineage, he wanted a position greater than all of them. So, that was possible only by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he approached the Supreme Lord with a desire. But we find not only his desire was fulfilled, he became completely purified. And he repented. Later on we find he repented that, my dear Lord, what kind of desire I had, that instead of going back to Godhead, I have to remain in this material world separated from you for so long. He was repenting later on. And of course he also said, after having the darshan of the Lord, he said, my dear Lord, I was just kachan vichinvanapi divyaratnam swamin krithartosmi varam nayache. I am completely satisfied. I do not desire anything else. So all the desires can get fulfilled. But once the intelligence is stolen away, then a person cannot understand. He cannot understand. So he thinks his intelligence is so bewildered. One is, he does not have that faith that Supreme Lord can satisfy all desires. That actually he is Kalpataru. The Supreme Lord is, the spiritual world is, it is compared to a desire-fulfilling tree. Anything, whatever one may desire, everything can be fulfilled. So he cannot understand this. He thinks that for my varieties of desire, I require to approach these varieties of in charge of this material world. If I require a good offspring, then I have to worship certain Devata. Because that is what is recommended in the Vedic literature also. If you require a beautiful wife, certain worship, kind of worship is mentioned. If you require prosperity, then certain kind of Vedic sacrifices are mentioned. If you want to eat meat, then Kali worship is mentioned. So they are bewildered and they think that this is how I have to approach if I have to satisfy my desires. So they are not able to see that actually all these Devatas, they are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. They are part and parcels. They are not independent. So Bhagavatam is giving the example, Yatha Taror. Just like if you simply water the root, then all the shakhas, all the different trunks, all the different parts of the tree, they automatically get nourished. Similarly, if I satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all these varieties of Devatas, they will all be satisfied. Even if I want to satisfy different Devatas, the best method is to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is what Bhagavatam is giving the example. Another example is given in Bhagavatam is just like the stomach. Indriyana, right? All the different senses are connected to the stomach. And if the stomach is satisfied, all the different senses will be automatically satisfied. So actually, if we want to make people Krishna conscious, this is very, very important to understand that actually we have to explain to them this understanding that there is no doubt you may have so many different desires. But if you simply worship the different Devatas, the different demigods, you will get only limited results. Bhagavad Gita is explaining all that. Whereas if you worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not only the limited results which we are behind, our intelligence will become purified and we will get the real Purushartha. Only these four are not the Purusharthas. Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha are considered to be the Chatur Purusharthas. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says there is Panchama, which is the highest Purushartha, and that is to attain love of Godhead. That you will not find direct mention in the Vedic literature because it is very, very rare. So actually, to come to devotional service is not very easy. It is very, very rare. You can imagine actually if we have come to somehow or other engaged in devotional service of the Lord, it is because somewhere that ignorance by this potency of spiritual sound, that ignorance, that knot has become slackened. Otherwise there is no possibility. If a person is filled with material desire, we find his intelligence is lost, right? But spiritual sound is so strong that any kind of such ignorance, the example is given, that sunshine does not require to shine like a bright sunshine of the afternoon sun. You see, Niharam iva bhaskara. Even the early morning rising of the sun can dissipate the darkness of ignorance. So actually, we will do good to the people if somehow or other we can introduce devotional service to them, rather than they taking this gradual path of elevation, because there is no guarantee. One can perpetually go around. That is why it is said, Punah Punah Charvita Charvanana. He'll go to heavenly planet, come back, again go, again come back. This merry-go-round, it is just like a merry-go-round. And go up, go down, go up, go down. Eventually. Isn't it? So, the only process is, if somehow or other, one can come in touch with a pure devotee of the Lord through the teachings. So, Prabhupada has given these teachings, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and somehow or other, if we can make people to come in touch with these teachings, then there is a possibility that this ignorance can be mitigated, and then they can take to devotional service. So we were seeing the example. Here it is said, very beautiful it is described. Sacha api bhagavat dharmat kama mudha paranmukha. Why such a grahamedi person who is very interested in materialistic life, he remains paranmukha. He turns his face away from Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now this should be our understanding. Why so many demigod worshippers are there? Why you don't find people so much inclined in Krishna consciousness? Why they are paranmukha, right? So Bhagavatam is giving the answer for that. They are paranmukha because they are karma mudhan. Their intelligence is lost because of too much lusty desire, material desires. Sacha api bhagavat dharmat. From devotional service, bhagavat dharmat means devotional service. Kama mudha, because of infatuation by lusty desires. Paranmukha, he is averse to devotional service. He has turned away his face from devotional service. Whereas you will find him religious minded. Not that he is not religious minded. He is. He is a pious man. What is he doing? What is he engaged in? He is not taken up to devotional service of the Lord. What is he doing then? Yajate. He is worshipping. What does he worship? Krutubhir, with varieties of sacrifices. Devan, Pitramscha. He is more inclined in worshipping the varieties of demigods, his Pitrans, forefathers, by offering regularly Pindadana. Every year he will be offering. And how does he do that? Shraddhanvitaha, with lot of faith. So of course the Vedic literature does say that somehow or other, if they are engaged in pious activities, intelligent man should not tell them to give up these activities. Rather, he should gradually mold them to Krishna consciousness. So that is very, very important. So we all find that actually we were all practically in the same category. Most of us were not atheists. We were all, born in pious Hindu families, going to the temples, isn't it? Different temples we would be going. Wherever we see temple, even now also you can see any temple people see, immediately they will turn and they will, offer their pranams. So that means actually people are pious. There is no doubt about it. But gradually we have to introduce Krishna consciousness. So as we are seeing in Bhagavad Gita, in all the Vedic literatures, in Bhagavad Gita, it is very nicely, if you see, two processes are always there. direct process and indirect process. In all the Vedic literature you will find. Bhagavad Gita also you will find. Sometimes people say why Krishna is not described only bhakti. Isn't it? Because Krishna also wants that people who are following karma, can they also be engaged somehow or other in Krishna consciousness? People who are after jnana, can they also be slowly somehow or other, they can also proceed towards Krishna consciousness. They can also be elevated gradually. And then Krishna is also giving after describing all these varieties of process, Krishna is also telling, Sarva Dharman, whatever I have said, give up all that. Take this direct process. Mam ekam sharanam raja. You see. And you will find that in every chapter. Just like in that chapter also, in second chapter itself, Krishna is describing fruitive activities, Krishna is describing flowery language, Vedic literatures are there, people get carried away by all that. And then Krishna is explaining this, that what purpose is served by, and similarly, one who knows the purpose of the Vedas, then it is served. All the purpose of the Veda is served by a person who knows the purpose of the Veda. And what is the purpose of the Veda? Vedescha sarve ahameva vedyaha. You see? All the purpose of the Veda is to know Krishna. So if we know Krishna, then all this purpose is served. So Prabhupada used to give this few very interesting examples. One example was of the lift and staircase. So all these gradual processes are like the staircase. They will also gradually lead you to the 100th floor. Suppose you have to go to 100th floor, that is your destination. So through staircase you will reach first floor, you will reach second floor, you will reach third floor. Or you take directly the lift and you just press there 100. Directly you go to the 100th floor. So devotional service is like that elevator, and all these different processes, what is described, this is like the staircase process. Or as Krishna is saying, devotional service is like that flowing river. All the purpose can be served. You don't require one well for this, one well for this. You don't require that. Isn't it? Similarly, you will find in other chapters also where Krishna is describing about yoga also. Krishna explains about both processes. Krishna is describing how one has to sit, how one has to perform breathing exercises. All those Krishna is describing. But at the end Krishna is telling yoginam api sarvesham madgata antaratmana. But still Arjuna, that yogi is the greatest who is connected to me with devotional service. Jnana Krishna is describing, but then Krishna is also explaining bahunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapadhyate vasudevam sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. Right? So you can find Krishna everywhere in all chapters practically you will find both the processes are described. Krishna is giving this process also, but at the end Krishna is also telling, but better than this is take the elevator, take the elevator. This is what Krishna is telling. And finally this is what Krishna is giving the essence in the end. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Bhagavatam is the beginning of the elevator process. What Krishna has factually described in Bhagavad Gita, what one should take to, how one should take that to that elevator process is Bhagavatam. That's why in Bhagavatam it is very clearly said, Dharma projita kaitva. Such process Bhagavatam is not entertaining. You take to karma, you take to jnana, you take to worship of the... Bhagavatam is saying, you be akama, you be sarva kama, does not matter. Directly take to this elevator process. Isn't it? So that is called as Bhagavata Dharma. So this is what, in following in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada and all these Goswamis, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who has given us this most profound process of devotional service, susukham kartum avyayam. Little austerity, not much austerity, isn't it? If you find the different processes, whether you have to mug up the different grammars, if you want to be a jnani also, 12 years it will take to become, first of all, to master Sanskrit and then interpret the Vedic literature. So all these things are very difficult in Kali Yuga. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given very simplified process that simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord, our consciousness can be immediately purified and we can immediately take to devotional service of the Lord, and we can achieve, just by chanting the holy name of the Lord, we can achieve Krishna Prema. So we'll stop with this Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai.